Video. You're watching the first lesson on cellular biology. This video will be talking about what cells are. We'll be introducing the concept of cells, introducing what makes life, and what life needs in order to survive. So I like to start this lesson with a picture of a series of living things and saying, well, how many different types of life do we see? Now, most people would say, oh, well, there's plants, animals, and fungi. Some people would even confuse fungi with plants. Some people would say, oh, well, there's a mammal, there's a bird, there's a fish, there's an insect, there's a lizard, this is a fern, this is a flower, and these are trees. And so you can see that there's many different ways of categorizing life, and there's many different types of life. And so life can come in many different shapes and sizes, right? From the very large African elephant to the very tiny tardigrade, also known as the water bear. And so, what is the basic form of life? Where does life sort of start out, or how small can life get? And so, that's what we're going to start with this unit. We're going to talk about, well, how does life exist and how small can it be? So, let's start off with what are things that life needs? Well, even though life is so varied, all life needs five things to exist. The first thing is energy, right? In order to be able to do anything, you need energy. You need to use energy. If you don't have energy, you can't do anything. So that's basically the most important thing that life needs. The second is an environment, right? A living thing needs a place to live. Without it, it really can't exist anywhere. Three, reproduction, right? To reproduce, to make babies, to make more of yourself, ensures that your form of life, whatever life you represent, exists or continues to exist, right? You have growth. All life needs to grow and develop. And five, all life produces waste. So we're going to go into more detail about this, and we're going to start with energy. All life requires energy. This comes in the form of food and water, right? When an animal or a plant or whatever living thing is eating something or drinking something, it's using that to get nutrients and in order for it to be able to get energy. So life can have many different ways of collecting life. So here we have a picture of a lamprey, a type of fish that will stick onto other fish and basically drill a hole into them and drink blood. And that's how they get their food and water. Here we have the mouth of a leatherback turtle, right? The inside have these sort of pointed ends along the inside of the mouth in order to trap a jellyfish. And that's how they get their food, right? Here we have a fly with that weird sort of suction plunger mouth, right? Right there. And these guys use that mouth to collect food and water. They basically spit on their food, digest it outside, and then drink it up. And we have one of the more interesting ones, the moray eel, that has a second mouth inside its mouth. And so when it eats something, when it bites something, the second mouth comes out, grabs something, and pulls it back. And so all of these animals have very different ways of collecting and getting energy. But they all require energy. It's just the way they do it is different. Plants can also do things differently. This video will talk about Venus flytraps and how this is a plant that doesn't do things plants normally do. These are plants that actually eat animals. And this is their unique way of getting their own nutrients, getting their own food, and making their own energy. The second thing that all life needs is an environment. So we talked about the first thing, energy. Now, environment. All life needs uh, all life needs a place to live. They need a place to live and adapt. And these environments can vary a lot, meaning that they have their own challenges, right? If you live in the ocean, right, you're going to need to be able to swim. You're going to need to be able to move around. You're going to need to be able to breathe or collect energy in that water, in that environment. Well, the challenges of the Antarctic might be a little bit different, right? It's cold. It's much colder over there. It's slippery. It's dangerous. There's not a lot of food. So you need to be able to survive there. Or deep down under all this water at the bottom of the ocean, you have sulfur pits where the temperatures reach hundreds of degrees. And if you look at these red things here, these are worms. Well, this is a habitat that reaches over 200 degrees Celsius, and it's full of sulfur and no sunlight gets in. And yet life has found a way to adapt, get energy there. So some environments can be deadly, as I just showed you with this 250-degree temperature water and the Antarctic, right? So the animals and the plants and the living things that exist there need to be able to adapt in that environment in order to live there. Reproduction. Well, all life needs a form of reproduction to continue existing. If they couldn't make more of themselves to reproduce, then that life form won't exist anymore. So we as humans make little babies, right? Chickens, most birds, lizards will make eggs, and plants will make seeds. And many of them will make fruit so that animals and other things will consume the fruit and spread the seeds out. And so all living things have their own way of reproducing, and they have their own way of making sure that their form of life continues to exist. Growth. All living things need to grow into adults, right? When you look at a plant, it doesn't come out as a tree, right? It starts out as a seed and eventually develops into a sapling and grows into a small plant and eventually maybe even a tall tree. Same with people, right? But rather than being a seed, we start as basically an embryo. And as we get older and move on, we get a little bit bigger and develop and grow, right? The reason for this growth, the reason why we start out so small, is because it would be uncomfortable to be born or develop as an adult. A plant can't really grow another tree on it and sustain itself, and animals and human beings can't really give birth to an adult. So we have to start small and then eventually develop and grow. All living things make waste, right? In order to collect energy from things, we also make waste. So all living things make waste. So the wastes we make as people, you can think of poo, pee, as well as CO2. We breathe that out every second of every day. Well, plants also make waste, and they make oxygen. And you may be thinking, well, isn't that what we breathe in? Exactly. So we've sort of co-adapted with plants, right? They, quote unquote, breathe out oxygen, right? We take that in, convert it into CO2, and they take that in and convert that into oxygen. So it creates a very nice and balanced system of controlling CO2 amounts while also controlling oxygen amounts in the environment. So as trees get cut down in the Amazon and things like that, well, you start losing things that control the amount of CO2 in the air, which is why it's such a big greenhouse gas. So what makes up all life? So we talked about the 5 things all life needs. Life needs energy. Life needs an environment. Life needs to grow. Life needs to reproduce. And life needs to make waste. Well, what makes life up? Right? What is the smallest unit of life? That would be cells. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about cells mainly. Now, all life is made of cells. That's the takeaway from this lesson. All life is made up of cells. This life can be made up of only one cell, right? Can be made up of only one cell, or can be made of millions of them, like we are, or whales are, right? Millions upon millions of cells make whales in us, while bacteria are typically only made up of one cell. And so life, again, comes in very many shapes, sizes, and forms, but they're all made up of cells. So sometimes the rule isn't always followed when it comes to cells being so small. This is an example of an algae that can get very large even though it's only made up of one cell. But typically one cell is microscopic and you need a microscope in order to be able to see it. So why should we care? What is the importance of learning about cells? Why should we learn about this? Why should we study this besides it being part of our schooling? Well, this is why. Before we understood what cells were, before we understood that there were things that we couldn't see that are alive, we didn't know what caused diseases. Back then, people thought blood, having bad blood, having too much blood, having certain fluids in your body would cause these diseases, and they would take them out of you. And as we all know, losing a lot of blood is bad for you. So, upon the discovery of cells and tiny living things, we've learned how to treat them. We've learned how they work. We've learned how they live, right? We now know that bacteria make us sick, not blood. And so we can use antibodies, we can make penicillin, we can make medicine to treat diseases. One of the deadliest diseases in the world is malaria. This is what the malaria parasite looks like. This affects 600 million people around the world, right? And so understanding how this little one cell living thing affects our bodies allows us to be able to treat it and allows less people to die every year from this disease. So, how do cells come together to make multicellular things? Well, cells that come together that do the same job is called a tissue. So, a tissue is a group of cells doing the same job. A tissue is a group of cells doing the same job. So, this is a muscle cell, right? In this case, specifically a smooth muscle cell. And if you have a bunch of these smooth muscle cells working together, you end up with muscle tissue, right? A bunch of cells working together to do the same job. Well, if you have a bunch of tissues working together, you have an organ. So if you have all this smooth muscle working together, all this smooth muscle tissue working together, you end up with an organ. And in this case, it would be your bladder, right? So when you have a lot of tissues working together, you have an organ. When your organs are working together, you have an organ system. When organs work together, you have an organ system. So we have the cell, the muscle cell, working together to make muscle tissue. The muscle tissue makes the bladder, this organ. Well, this organ works with other organs like the kidney and the ureters and the urethra to make our urinary system or this organ system. So again, cells make tissues. Tissues make organs. Organs work together to make organ systems. And when you have a bunch of organ systems working together, you have an organism. So in this case, we have the urinary system working together with the circulatory system, the blood system, and they work with other systems in order to make an organism. And so all these organ systems work together to make us, to make other living things, and to make other large animals and plants. And so understanding cells and understanding how they work and understanding what they need in order to survive gives us a deeper insight into our systems, ourselves, and what we need in order to live healthy lives. So this is the first lesson. It just introduces what cells are. It introduces the basic unit of life, cells, and it tells you what the 5 things life needs in order to survive. Life needs an environment. Life needs to grow. Life needs energy. Life needs to reproduce. And life produces waste. Thank you for listening, and see you next lesson.